Today is about how to achieve the best possible price for your land or property and the best way to sell it. If you're flipping property, you need to know the best way to achieve the highest possible price and the best way to sell the property, especially when using purchase options. Okay, let's start with the best way to sell land or property when using purchase options. So typically when you're using an option agreement to purchase a property, i.e. controlling an asset in order to presumably add some value to it before you gain ownership of it, so you can sell it on to a replacement buyer. And ideally you don't even want to complete the purchase yourself, you actually want to position yourself with a replacement buyer before you're committed to buy it. So you literally just take a margin. That's typically what purchase option contracts are used for. Agreeing something at a price, controlling it, adding value some way in terms of planning permission in this instance, and then selling that contract and right to purchase onto a replacement buyer to make a margin. Call me mad, but I don't think it's a good idea to put all your faith and trust in a replacement buyer that you're going to sell this option contract to after you've spent all this money trying to get planning. Let's say you've now got the planning permission and you're now under the clock to let the owner know whether you're going to buy it and actually perform the purchase. So if you've got somebody who's verbally agreed they're going to do it, even that, that's not good enough, because you're putting, as I said, too much faith and too much trust in that person performing. But what I've seen countless times is then you go to give the good news to the person who said they were going to buy this contract off you, and the excuses start coming through. Oh, I've just bought something else, or yeah, I have to renegotiate because something's happened, some rubbish. It could even be that they were never a buyer in the first place. I mean, there's so many people out there being taught to try and put an offer on a property even if you can't buy it, and then once you get it accepted, go and find someone else who can actually buy it and then take a fee. It's called a finder's fee. They're not the buyers you want. So let's start with an example. Let's say I've agreed to buy someone's property or land on an option contract for £100,000. Now, I've worked through and I've determined who's going to buy it for the best possible price, and let's say that's £150,000. I go out, I go through the process that I usually would do to find that buyer, which typically involves pricing it at a relatively below market value price, like you do in an auction, a guide price, with the tag of offers in excess of, to gain the highest amount of interest possible. Now, I use Embark, an agency, which I'm completely biased towards as it's my agency, but the guys there really do know their stuff when it comes to land, options, flipping, and creating a stable environment for an option flipper when looking to secure a replacement purchaser. So how do we do it? What we do, we've already determined that I won 150,000. We've already determined that I've agreed to buy the property for 100,000. So my margin is 50,000. What I will do before planning permission is achieved, I will say to that buyer, I want to exchange contracts with you to obligate you to complete the purchase, mirroring my option terms that I've agreed with the seller. So, and if you pull out, I still want my £50,000. So what I do, I'll exchange contracts with them to legally bind them to complete at the agreed purchase price of £150,000, but they'll be putting down effectively a £50,000 deposit. Now, if I'd agreed to sell it to them for £125,000, I'd be securing and asking for a £25,000 deposit. Whether my replacement buyer completes or not, I'm going to get that regardless, obviously subject to planning permission. Therefore, when planning permission comes through, I can truly celebrate because I've already exchanged with my buyer, which enables me to exchange with my seller. If the buyer pulls out, I've still got my exchange contract monies. And I'm a true believer of celebrating your wins, aka getting pissed normally for me. But it's a bit of a false celebration when you get the planning permission. It kind of doesn't feel completely right and exciting at that point, because you get the planning permission and you've still got to find the buyer, or you've still got to hope the buyer proceeds and delivers. So that's why I like to do it the way I've just explained, because when you get your planning permission, you can start getting the beers in, and that's important, more so not so for the beers, but more important in the fact that you're spending a lot of money procuring this planning consent. You want to make sure that it's actually going to come to fruition and you're not going to be let down by a third party. So I hope that answers the question on how would I best sell a land or option contract. Now, I touched on just now about trying to work out what someone's prepared to pay. Here's a quick example for you. If I'm going to sell a property to somebody who wants to make a 50% margin on their money, I'm never going to want to sell to them, because there's other people that are going to be prepared to pay more. So what it's about is trying to find the person that's prepared to pay the most money, which you can work by reverse engineering their expectations. You just have to ask them what their expectations are in order to do that. But secondly, you want someone robust. So there's no good getting someone who says they're going to buy it for a fortune more than anybody else if they can't buy it themselves. So there is a certain amount of due diligence that you need to go into, which could be proof of funds. It could be a number of things you could do to check the viability and credibility of a prospective buyer. But let's just focus on how you work out who is going to pay the highest possible price. I've already calculated what the price, A, that I'm happy with, and B, more importantly, what someone is going to be prepared to pay. Now, there's lots of different types of option buyers who have got very different strategies. Some have got different intentions with what they intend to do with the property and or land once they've bought it or built it out, and some have different payment structures. Some buy in cash, some need development finance. So due to all those variables, all these different people and parties, they're going to have a different way of working out what their profit margin is. And again, the other thing I didn't mention was they've all got different profit margin expectations. Some want to do it for 50 grand. Some will only do it if they make 25%. Some want 15%. So all those variables determine what someone is going to be prepared to pay for the option contract that you've created and gained consent on. So let's take the example of the cash buyer versus the development finance buyer. Let's assume they both want to make the same profit margin. Typically, most developers, investors are looking for a 25% margin on their money. Let's assume that the cash buyer comes along, he's doing his figures, he's saying, I'm going to buy this land, let's say I pay £150,000 for the land, and it's going to cost me £150,000 to build it. What do I need to sell that for to get my desired 25% return on capital employed or return on investment, however they work it out? The finance buyer, the developer who needs development finance, has got to pay a fee for the finance in the first place, probably got a fee to pay at the end, and relatively high interest rates throughout the term of the purchase, build, until they actually sell the asset. So they've got a much higher cost in there to take into account when doing their valuation methodology to determine what they're going to be prepared to pay for this land, which is going to be lower than the cash buyer, because the cash buyer hasn't got to factor in those figures. So you might find the development finance buyer in this instance might say, oh God, I've got £20,000 worth of financing costs here, I can't pay 150, I'm going to pay 130. So in that example, the cash buyer is the best person to sell to for two reasons. One, they're prepared to pay more because they haven't got finance to factor in, and two, they're more robust because they're not relying on a surveyor or not relying on a lender or a broker coming through to get that finance for them. Another example could be if you've got somebody, a developer, who doesn't have a team of builders on their payroll. They just contract out once the as per projects come in. They're going to look at it as an isolated project. If I buy this, I need to get contractors in. What are they going to charge me to build it, etc., etc. Whereas let's say there's an example where you've got a bigger developer who's got a team of builders on their payroll, and something's happened within their process, and they've got to a point where actually there's nothing for the guys to get their hands dirty with. So what the developer may do is take on a project that's perhaps lower profit expectations than usual, just to keep the workforce busy and doing something. So just to recap there, once you've decided what marketing price you're going to put the property on for, or land, you've set it slightly lower to maximise interest levels. You've put the flag on it to say offers in excess of, just to manage expectations on those prospective replacement purchasers. You've given it to a good agent that fully understands land and options and what you're trying to achieve, and you're casting the net out there for the maximum number of potential buyers as possible, all shapes and forms, as previously mentioned. And what is very important then to do, if the agent doesn't know the inner workings or expectations of certain buyers, they need to ask those questions to be able to find out those answers in order to know exactly what they're going to be prepared to pay. You know, I touched on it just now, and that was, you know, profit margin expectations, how they're intending on purchasing the property, and what they're intending to do with it once they've purchased the property. For example, if somebody's actually intending on buying a property, doing something to it, i.e. exercising the planning that you may have got on the property, if they're going to keep it and rent it out, they're not going to be factoring in disposal costs such as selling agent fees, capital gains tax, a number of different things that you'd have to pay if you were disposing of assets after a refurbishment, a remodel, or a build. So again, those guys who are looking to retain haven't got so many costs to factor in, and therefore may be prepared to pay more for the property or land than somebody who has actually full intentions of selling, because they're going to take into account those costs. So guys, flipping properties is desirable, it's fruitful, it's exciting, it's an amazing thing to do, and you can do it from pretty much anywhere, but you have got to know what you're doing. It's very risky just to rush in and get an option contract signed, and please don't listen to those people who say, oh, just back of the fag packet, you know, work off a percentage of GDV, 25, 30, 35% of GDV to determine what the plot value is going to be. It's absolute nonsense. You know, there's so many factors to consider, you know, like CIL, Community Infrastructure Levy. Depending on that one factor, totally skews the percentage on GDV when you're trying to work out what a plot is. Guys, I hope that was useful. And remember, you can always reach out to me if you've got any questions, and I wish you all the greater success with your own property journeys. See you again soon.